Welcome in. It's another edition of the On the Mic podcast. And normally, there's no days off for me, but normally I don't wake up early to conduct interviews. But for this man and his amazing work and great book, I had no problem waking up, reading it twice now in the last 12 hours. He is Chris Rini of Bloody Elbow. You can see all his stuff over on social media at Bloody Elbow. And now you can check out The Fine Art of Violence, Volume 2. Sir, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on, Mike. It's good to see you again.
Yeah. Last time we talked, the pandemic just started. We were no idea when the world was ever going to return. When it first started, I was like, maybe May, June, we'll be back. Well, here we are almost a year and a half later. And now, I realized this the other day. I want to say it was Sunday. You're a New York guy, so I think you kind of feel the atmosphere, whether you're a basketball fan or not. The Nets are in the playoffs. They're running through everybody, but the Garden is back. And I don't know if it's just the year of 2020 and what 2021 has started that the Knicks have to bring life into my life. But it feels like sports are back. It feels like life is slowly getting back to normal. Does it feel that way for you?
It is. I happen to live in what was called the epicenter. So it is even slower to come back over here. There's like everyone wears a mask still outside, and you can't help but know people who died or who were affected. It's everything is super close. It's not even 6 degrees of separation. It's 3.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm feeling it. My 6-year-old was at home for 13 months. And she finally started going back to school, and she only goes 2 days a week, but man, she loves it. She is baby, we're going to school today.
That's amazing. It's like the one wish parents wish they had, right? It's all right, if the kids just stay with us for 13 months, they'll never want to miss a day of school again. No That's more amazing, faking sick, no more Zooms, please, let's just get to school. But I think in a very weird way, I don't want to say ignorant, but as MMA people, it was so hard for us to realize what normal was like, and we saw what, the hit piece that the UFC and Dana White put out on the media last year. We saw that normal for us was, all right, well, there's fights on Saturday. It doesn't matter if there's a crowd or no crowd. Eventually we got used to no crowd, but now me working retail on a side job, I hear now, I'm going to the Cubs game this weekend. I'm going to the White Sox game. And you're like, wait, you guys do those things. Got it. Okay, now it's starting to make sense.
Yeah.
How has the past year of MMA and all the time you've been around the sport kind of changed the landscape forever, or has it changed at all?
Well, this book, it's almost entirely UFC. So while I'm producing the book, especially in the first 3 to 4 months of the year, where I'm really doing a lot of spreadsheet work, working with my graphic designer, laying out I literally have draw every page of the book. I think I got it right here. Maybe you can see this. This is how I lay out the book. It's
wow.
I have to draw every page. There's I have a photographer, because all the stuff I do is traditional artwork, almost all of it now, but they photograph it, and every file has a number, and that's how I sort everything out when I'm communicating with the designer. And it's just UFC. There's I think I have the McKee lock and AJ McKee and Darian Caldwell, that's in there. But I'm working on volume 3 already. And it's oh my God, I got a ton of Bellator. I got a bunch of PFL. I have a bunch of Invicta. I have a bunch of ONE. You see, the UFC sucked up all the oxygen. And I didn't realize it at the time. And then when you're laying out the book, you're whoa, okay, I'm making a UFC book this year. I made a conscious decision that I was not going to have the writers talk about the pandemic. The part of this whole series that I make is this is about fighters. This is about magic. This is about the human body. This is about what happens inside the cage. I really would like to lay off the drama, lay off the the I don't know, the shit talk, the things that like you kind of get into, but like you're into seeing a fight. You're into seeing like amazing, magical things that were only possible in movies before. That was the whole impetus behind this. It's like it's a celebration, you know. Anyway, so that's kind of my answer.
No, I love it. You could listen. The floor is yours. But no, and I want to say that because not only I think I love your work and I think it's beautiful work every single time. But I think one thing that's really connected you and I is that you find the beauty in what is the fight, right? Like, yes, you have your other stuff focusing on the drama and everything that we fall in love with. But I think if you just took the first time we ever did an interview, which was last year, and we fast forwarded to us talking right now, if you look at what 2021 has been just by the big pay-per-views of the month, you have Dustin Poirier beating Connor. Yeah. You have Jan Blachowicz beating Israel Adesanya, Francis winning the belt, Rose coming back and winning her belt, Kamaru Usman cementing his legacy, and Valentina Shevchenko doing the same. And it's just so on and so forth. It's people want to say like, wow, like 2021 is a crazy year. Like the BMF title is no more. Connor's losing. Yeah, that's the beauty of this sport. The beauty of this sport is just what we all went through in real life world 2020. And now we're all fighting a way back to the top. And I think 2021 has done that. So for you, why is it so important to focus on that moment? It may not even necessarily be the head kick that Rose Namajunas lands. It's Rose before the fight saying, I'm the best. I'm the best. I'm the best. It's those moments that I know you gravitate towards that capture you, that capture me, which is why I think you and I connect. Why are those moments so crucial for you in doing what you do?
It's because there are these there's this very fine like dividing line between moments where they're like transformative. And the way you're saying it is like there's like a psychological one where Rose is like saying that to herself, and then on the other side of the dividing line is her landing that head kick. You need to, whether you got to lie to yourself, fake it till you make it, or like say it until you truly believe it. Like she had to overcome something within herself to throw that head kick, to do that setup. And then there's like, or another one is like Israel Adesanya, I'm willing to die out there, heart of a lion, heart of a champ, going out there for round 5 versus Kelvin Gastelum. These are things like these like dividing lines between like the psychological aspect where you see a person, you're literally watching them like contemplate their own existence, contemplate everything they've worked their lives for. And then boom, like you watch them put it all on the line, test themselves, put all of their hard work, see if it was worth it, see if they were capable of following through in the end. And in my own artwork, I often will go through like I'll find a moment in a fight where I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, this is very beautiful and very tragic, very violent, whatever. And I'll go through like frame by frame. And what I've found is there is this same dividing line where a fight will look like a ballet performance, and then a frame later, it will look like a car crash. And I'm always trying to walk that line with my work. The last thing I want to do is get hung up on impact imagery, which is just tedious. It is not, that's what, and I don't say this in a derogatory way. That's what photography is for. The slobber knocker, when you like the ripples. You know what? Someone can do that really well with a camera. What I'm here for is that split second before where I've done a couple pieces. I did a really well-received piece for Vice years ago of John Jones throwing the spinning elbow on Stephan Bonner. And there's this, it reminded me of ballet more than it did of fighting. There's just the movement that people go through. It's dynamic, and it's not until almost after the impact that it becomes then it goes from dynamism to violence to tragedy to triumph. There's like a whole lifetime plays out in these nanoseconds, and that's where I kind of live in those interstitial spaces.
So then UFC 262 was like your bread and butter, because
Oh
we
Lord,
because
oh Lord,
we
yeah,
had. I mean, I was and I don't really bet on fights because I'm so close to it. But like I was telling everyone, because people are asking me, you know how the game is. Hey, who do you got in this fight? Who's this? And I'm like, I would just throw your house. I told one person, throw the house and the car on Michael Chandler. Like I was that confident on Michael Chandler. And then I'm like running around, like where I go watch my fights. I watch my fights at the same establishment every pay-per-view. And I'm like running around and people are going crazy because I told everyone in the bar, like, go Michael Chandler. And then everyone's like, dude, this is in the bag. 17 seconds later, the tragedy and then the triumph. And Charles Oliveira's dancing with Dana White, yelling at Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier. Like I'm gonna go out on a limb here and I guess kind of show. I don't want to say my lack of, historical knowledge around this sport, but 2021 is starting to remind me of one of the first years I covered this sport, 2016, where Conor won the second belt. We had Misha against Holly, Nate beating Conor, and everything mixed in between. If you look at how this year has started, and we're only about to be June, like we're just through the first half of this year. Yeah. And we still have so many more moments to capture. Like this is truly a wild time. And now it's time to, I guess, obviously get to the reason why you're here. This book, The Fine Art of Violence, Volume 2. Take me back to the first one and how this all came about, because obviously your work is published, by Bloody Elbow pretty much daily. And sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's controversial. And I see the hate you get, which is crazy because people just miss the artwork. But take me through how you went from Volume 1. You kind of talked about it's UFC heavy and it is all UFC in Volume 2. But how did this all start for you?
Well, I wanted to make fight work the theme behind my artwork, and it's kind of I kind of come at MMA from a roundabout way. I'm an artist, before I was anything else, and then I kind of realized in my early 30s that fighting was the theme behind my work, because I was watching fights and I was making artwork and not really putting two and two together. And I went on I was going through some life big changes, transitions, and I went on a meditation retreat, and I was like trying to get my head together, and I was like kind of had that like straight up eureka moment. Like you let the dust settle, you let everything chill out, and you're like, oh, of course, like the human body, like life drawing, painting, like I enjoy that. That's like what I like, using the body as a metaphor for everything. And I realized that, like, oh man, there's a bunch of people like, going through like the struggle for personal redemption, the, achievement, tragedy, loss, like shit is all playing out in front of you. And best of all, they're in their underwear. It's as close as it gets to like, sculpting the nude, that's just right there. And they're also like people in like peak performance shape, they're able to tell a story with their body because they all move so differently. There's one project that I really would like to do where people who have just such, what's the word I'm looking for? A signature, like their stance, like you could see them from their silhouette. Like there's this John Jones thing that he does, where his legs are really wide and his arms are really tight. Gegard Mousasi with his crazy, like hunched over neck thing. Like there's some people that are just unmistakable, like Carlos Condit with his real weird gangly limbs. These people are just fascinating to look at, and that's how I came to this. And I realized after a couple of years, you're working with Vice and working with a couple different companies, that like everybody wants something, but nobody wanted what I wanted to make. A lot of people, they're like, can you work with stars? Can you work with big stars? And I tried to do something with Ronda Rousey. I met Anderson Silva, but it's like, and this is not a dig on the individual people, but no fighter wants to do an in-depth piece about their losses. No fighter wants to, and I don't blame them, because they're usually like, whatever, man. That's a human. That's an individual. It takes a special person to want to talk in depth about 360 degrees who they are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I realized that like no one's going to hire me to tell the story that I want to tell. It's too long. It's too big. I want to do this for the rest of my life. People are trying to get clicks today. They're like, how can you, and my editors, they'll for a Bloody Elbow, if I can do something that like catches fire and just gets spread across the internet, they're like, hey man, great work today. But what I want to tell is like a big story that lasts a lifetime. And I realized I have to do it myself. So that's why I made the first book, and here's the thing, Bloody Elbow believed in me enough to do the cartoons every day, to comment, to have fun, and to cause a little bit of controversy and stir the pot. And that financed the book. I was able to figure out a way to give a platform, a company, give them what they want. They're going to pay me, and I'm going to use that money to make the book that I wanted to do. And then I made the book. I worked with Josh Rosenblatt, who was my editor at Vice. So I knew this guy believes in me. This guy knows that I have a bigger scope. And once the book was done, I did all the artwork. Josh did all the essays, and I sent it out to the heavy hitters: Fernanda Pratis, Julie Kedzie, Chuck Mindenhall, Sean Al-Shadi, Eugene S. Robinson, Josh again, and then Schwan Humes, who's a good analyst. And I was like, look, I made this. Do you want to be part of it? And they all said yes. And it was just super validating. I didn't get a single no. I got a bunch of yeses. And that was tremendous. And the other artists were like, oh, man, I think they could see like, oh, this guy is like going to let me do my thing and just flex the way I want to flex. And just, I want to build them up. This is not just a Chris Rini show. I would like for Chris Rini, I want other people to want to be associated with me because I'm putting out things that are evergreen.
Absolutely. Well, I want to touch on a couple things that you just hit on. One of them being, I always want to be associated with you first and foremost. So let me just go with that. Let's start with that. But to two things you said on the interview side, just to kind of solidify what you're saying. I rarely, if ever, reach out to a fighter after a loss, because exactly what you're saying, nobody wants to talk about that loss. And sometimes when I do, maybe I build that rapport well enough where they're like, yeah, I'll come on and talk. I don't even want to mention the L word. I'll say like, hey, I know things didn't go your way last time, because
right.
I think more than most, like this is such an emotional human, not just, and I said this to someone yesterday when I was going over the book for the first time. I said, I think that's why, and I'm going to kind of put myself on blast here. Hopefully my boss has never watched this, but why on my second job, I don't have that passion or like that drive, that emotion attached to what I do, because it's retail. Two, it's like on the side, and I'm nowhere near yourself or the heavy hitters that you mentioned. I try to stay humble in my lane, but when I do these interviews, I'm only this side of the camera. Even with you, I'm only here to help tell a story. So you want to get mad about things that happen in a retail store? Listen, on the weekends, I take off to watch people, as you said, fight in their underwear for probably half of their worth, and sometimes get a quarter of that. So don't talk to me about what upsets you about while you're in a retail store, because I know people, and I'll use the example I used to a friend yesterday. There are people in the sport like Jared Gordon, 2 heroin overdoses, facing 25 to life, gets a second chance at life, and yet probably still isn't making what he deserves. And that's not just fighter pay issue. That's just a life issue. And to what you were saying, it's not just fighters. I mean, I've had conversations off camera with people, not just in MMA, but in my personal circle. You start opening up to them and they're like, I didn't know you went through all this shit. And it's like, in 2020 and really this year for me hasn't been the easiest. And people are like, oh my God, like, is there anything? I'm like, I don't need like anyone to like give me something, because I'm still here. Like, let's just move on and keep telling the story. And to kind of bring it all back, we've talked about those moments. We talked about this, and you said you want to make something evergreen. You're already working on volume 3. I wanted to talk about the people that you brought in, and that more specifically the essays, because you went through pretty much all divisions in this book, The Fine Art of Violence, Volume 2. And there was a special story with pretty much every piece of art. And why was this the way you chose to kind of attack it in this book?
Well, I guess everybody has their own everybody has their own thing that they bring to the table, and I think for almost pretty much everyone, I had followed their work and I was like, you can do this, I know you can do this, I've perhaps you've heard this too, like sometimes fighters criticize the media, feeling like you don't have the right to comment on me, you're not in there fighting, you're not the person in the cage, only fighters should have the right to comment on that. And so I reached out to Julie Kedzie and I was like, you're the fighter, now you're a writer, like you are the person who has like this, constructed idea of like the permanent person who is allowed to comment on what happens in the cage. And I was like, best fight of the year, Wiley, Joanna, I want you to do this, and it wasn't necessarily because it's like, I want a woman to write about women fighting, but it just happened to work out that way. And oh my gosh, she like knocked it out of the park. It's a beautiful essay. It's just like, it what I was saying earlier about straddling that line between being like hyper intellectual and then really gut level, like, holy shit, this was amazing, And it's funny, like we talked on the phone one time, like, the struggles of putting together a narrative, and then, God, wasn't that amazing? You just get sucked in over and over and over again. And I know that Sean Al-Shadi, he is renowned for his long form pieces working with Edward Cow, who illustrates those. And I was like, dude, I can put you guys together, like, then it was a matter of like, who do you like? Who do you like to draw? Who do you like to write about? And I actually talked to Chuck Mindenhall, and he's like, oh yeah, he's a total Dustin Poirier mark. I was like, oh great, I'm gonna like put that all together. And Chuck and I have kind of been friendly with each other for years. And I was like, oh, I personally love tragedy. It makes for great drama. Early in my art MMA career, I would do commission work, where people like essentially like, hey, draw my favorite fighter beating the shit out of someone, or, I was like, oh man, again? Okay, fine. You make some money. And I was like, every winner looks the same, with very rare exception. But every loser, every person who falls, they fall in their own unique way, And I think Chuck understood where I was coming from with that idea. And that's why, the Jose Aldo piece is one of like the more poignant ones. I would implore anyone to visit at Rini MMA on Twitter. There is an animated time lapse of the making of the Jose Aldo piece with a voiceover that I recorded, an excerpt of Chuck's essay, and that's actually going to be a major part of Volume 3. These voiceovers with animation. It was just like an inspired moment. Schwan Humes, he is an analyst who's got a specialty in women's fights, and the whole thing where Rose like lost to Andrade and came back and won. I was like, dude, I know it happened. I can show you the imagery of like what I saw, but I want you to help me flesh it out. And poor Josh Rosenblatt, basically every time I come up with something for him, he has to like go to Wikipedia and start learning art history. I make him, he's a great writer and a great editor. And I basically am like, whatever I feel like, oh, if I could write, I would write about this. I use art history as a jumping off point for the stories that I want to tell visually, and then I make him learn that and write about it.
Well, I'm going to kind of put the spotlight on you here for a second, Chris, because you talked about two guys that I have the utmost respect for, although I've never spoken to them, Sean Al-Shati and Chuck Mindenhall. They tell stories in written form that I try to kind of emulate when I do these interviews and when I sit down and write these pieces. And then for me, when I see your drawings every day, when I see everything that you do, like I take inspiration from that, not from a stance of being an artist, but in a way of telling a story. And I think that's what people said, oh, you walked away from doing NBA and NFL stuff. Maybe you could have had a sports radio job already. I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't, and it, eventually once someone gives a shit about my name, it's not going to just be MMA fighters. Like there's so many more people I want to talk to, because I think there's so many people that need their stories having help tell their stories. And that's what eventually I want to do. And so I really put you three and a few others kind of in this circle and bubble for me on way to tell stories. And the Fine Art of Violence too does exactly that. And again, I'll plug it for you at Rini MMA on Twitter. Check that out. It's absolutely incredible. And
actually, you can get it. You can get the book physical format or a digital download at chrisrini.com. CHRISRINI.com.
Beautiful. I was gonna get there. I had to get it for you. But to all of this though, when it comes to what this sport is and kind of how you have to go about it, because sometimes it is very sensitive in the way that you tell this story. Sometimes you mentioned photography, and you can catch those moments, tragic or triumph, in just one photo. Everyone talks about the Jorge Masvidal photo with all the sweat flying off this year.
All right.
I cringe every time I hear the name Chris Weidman, because the photo of his leg now sticks out, no pun intended, more than anything. And you specifically had an essay done on Esther Lin, who I remember the first time I met her, I had just gotten into this sport, the only time I've met her. And I was like, that's Esther Lin. Like, we were in the same gym together, and my cameraman went over and was like, oh my God, so nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah. And the fact that you chose a specific person who's on the outside of the cage, like, why did you feel it's necessary? Obviously, it's not a shock that someone would chronicle Esther Lin. She's amazing. But in the art form, why was it important for you to take photography and, without a doubt, the most beloved figure in photography and MMA and combat sports, and Esther, why was it important for you to chronicle her?
Well, I mean, obviously she's decided to step away from the journalist side of fight photography in 2020. But two things. Number one, when I started making fight imagery, I was just like, all right, let me look up, Google image, a bunch of fights and see if there's stuff I can copy. Like that was my practice. Start practicing, start getting the hang of it, and grabbed a bunch of photos. I used to do wood engravings. I did that. And at some point I was like, I should probably look up who did all these photos. They're going to see this stuff online. And it's like 90% of them, Esther Lin, Esther Lin, Esther Lin, Esther Lin. I was like, whoa, who's this Esther Lin? So, obviously, no, not obviously. I'm an artist. She's an artist. Just without knowing who she was. When I started, I knew very little about the media landscape. And I really just, her work resonated with me without even knowing that that's who that person was, who she worked for, anything. So, it was one of those things where I'm like, this is a person with vision. I admire them, obviously, without even knowing who they are. And then I heard her interview with Fernanda Prates on the Best Camp of My Life podcast. And I was really touched by it. I thought it was just a fantastic interview. I feel like I learned a lot about what her experience was like as a person who put in the time. And, I just felt like, this is a person who deserves respect, and not even in passing, like, oh yeah, you like her, oh she's great. And I met her and Casey years ago in Vegas, and they were just killer, just lovely people. And at that time I felt like I was a total nobody, but I was just like I was tweeting everybody. I was like, yo, I'm in Vegas. You want to hang out? You want to get a beer? Come visit my booth. I had a booth at UFC Fan Expo. And that's how I met Esther, Casey. I met Chuck and a couple other people. And they were all so gracious. They're all wonderful people. And I felt like, man, this person needs to be acknowledged, like hard copy. You know, retirements in MMA are kind of a running gag, but somewhere in between just like a throwaway thing to like on the other side, like too much hagiography, you know, like let's just acknowledge the human being. And so I, because Fernanda did the interview, I asked her to write the essay, and then I kind of like in the back channels, I was like, hey, who's her friend? You know, who is she buddies with? Like, if they want to, if your friend was retiring, wouldn't you want to see them treated a certain way? That's why Mark Raimondi, Cynthia Vance, and Sean Al-Shadi, and I tried so hard to get Luke Thomas to write something. It just didn't work out, but he wanted to, but it just didn't work out. That's why I put it there, man. Dude, she made her mark. She did it. People will look at her work, they'll be like, oh, that's great. They won't know who did it, but people in the know will.
You can get The Fine Art of Violence Volume 2 at chrisrini.com. And before I let you go, has there been anything we have not touched on? I mean, I just want to say the way if I had to quick summarize, and I hope you don't take any disrespect to this, is that there's these essays visually paint a picture through words about the topics that are being covered. And then the artwork matches that. And I think it's absolutely beautiful. That's the best way for me to describe this. That's why I've read it and gone through it twice now in the last 12 hours. You know, it's not just because you and I were talking, but because sometimes, again, like people ask me all the time, why don't you ask that hard question? Hey, why didn't you make weight? Or what's this or what's that? And sometimes it's like, I don't want to ask that question because that's not what I'm here for. And I know, and I'm not trying to put myself on a level I don't deserve to be on, but people ask, he gets a lot of shit. And maybe his commentary has fallen off recently, and that's on him. But people go, hey, you just never, and maybe you have someone like this. I don't feel on top of my game unless I've been listening to Rogan's podcast consistently, almost daily. And I used to, when I first got into the sport, I was like, I'm only going to listen when he's talking to someone revolved around fighting. And for me, it's not because I agree with every viewpoint he has.
Yeah.
It's because, and I'm sure you see this in every fight, not every conversation is the same. So not every piece of art is going to be the same. Not every fight is going to be the same. So for me, I need to consistently hear the way these conversations are being had, so I know how I can address conflict in every conversation. So I guess two questions here. One, what have we not touched on? And two, do you kind of have that where it's like, I need to consistently find change in my work so that I always know how to stay on top of my work?
I do think that one needs to evolve with the times. And, you know, I waited a very, very long time before I tried to make digital artwork. And this book, volume 2, features my first ever digital painting, you know, and volume 3 will feature a ton more. You have to grow. I read a great biography of Miles Davis by the writer Ian Carr. I recommend anybody should read it. It's a great book. And one of the things that Miles Davis did was for his entire life, he made sure he always played. He had a couple people who are 18 to 21 years old in his band. He knew you have to continually grow. You have to evolve with the times. You have to stay relevant. And to bring it back to Joe Rogan, you know, like, is that man growing? Is he evolving with the times? You know, I would recommend anybody who wants to hear like back when Joe Rogan was truly, truly a transformative and informative member of the MMA landscape, listen to the commentary of George St. Pierre versus Carol Parisian. listen to that commentary, and then listen to the man today. And if you think it's the same person, then good on you. You know,
Yeah.
I recently, I actually wrote into a podcast I'm a fan of, the Co-Main Event. I was like, it feels to me like sometimes the commentary team is like not analyzing the fight so much as trying to predict the fight.
Yeah.
So that, because like that, you know, the Edson Barboza, Terry Adam knockout, where he's like, you better watch out, don't drop his hands or he's gonna get knocked out, you know, and it's like, boom, he is viral. The knockout, the Rogan, the everything, and it feels like they're commentating for the end result instead of commentating what is happening in the moment.
Yeah.
It's a subtle distinction. It's nitpicky. I'm not even going to make believe that I have the right to comment on it, but I'm like, man, yo, kick it back over to Anik. That dude is amazing. You know,
like, he really is. I'm going to blame Tony Romo for that, though. For NFL fans, Tony Romo ruined commentary, I believe, for all former athletes getting into broadcasting. Because Tony Romo, a quarterback would go up to the line of scrimmage. Tony Romo would read the formation and be like, you want to watch out because they're going to throw the out, and then they throw the out, and there's a first down. To the point where I believe CBS, and there was articles done on this, CBS had to have a talk with Tony, like, you're hurting our broadcast. You're amazing, but you're hurting our broadcast because fans want to see the play out. They don't want you to predict exactly what's going to happen. And I love Paul Felder, Michael Bisping, Daniel Cormier, Dominic Cruz, and everyone on those broadcasts. But too many times, I don't know if you agree, but too many times we hear especially the retired fighters. Now Paul Felder's part of that crew. They're trying to explain what's about to happen, just as you said, before it's happening. And then with Anik and Rogan alongside, they just kind of have to go with it. You know, my point about Rogan was, I'm currently on the Dave Chappelle episode, so I'm like 8 episodes behind where he is right now. But for me, it's, man, Dave Chappelle's a polarizing figure. Dave Chappelle doesn't do a lot of interviews. I get it, they're friends, but you also have to have certain conversations with your friends. And I'm not saying everything Rogan says and the way he goes about all interviews is great, because it's not, and he's in hot water more times than not of recent. But there's still, in my classic example, you brought up a broadcast example, I'll bring up an interview example. Go back to when, if you remember, when Tyron Woodley was the champion, he kind of played the UFC doesn't want a black champion card. And him and Rogan had a small interaction where Tyron was like, you know, they just don't want to champ. And Rogan was like, who says you're not champion? And he wanted Tyron to say, like, social media commenters and fans and racists. And Rogan was simply like, you see that belt right here on my table? The one that you brought in here? That's your belt. That means no one can say shit to you. You are the undisputed 170-pound champion of the world. And then Tyron was like, yeah, you know, you're right. And completely knocked him off guard of exactly what he wanted to say. That, to me, is a classic Rogan moment in his interviewing. And that, to me, is where I want all my conversations to go. Just, I'm sure you have a target for all of your artwork. I want to be able to have that moment. And it doesn't always have to be a conflict moment. I want to be able to just talk about something where I pull back or you pull back off of one stance and I'm able to question you about one thing, no matter what it is. You may not want to touch it. And so for you as an artist, sometimes you have these moments where people don't want to touch on those moments. You had a couple of them last year during the pandemic. You know what I mean? You had a few. How do you drop that kind of wall, those boundaries, those, people are probably not going to like this because not many people want to go there. I'm going to go there. How do you drop that and just ignore it all?
I'm very fortunate that my work can be segmented, and that, you know, when I want to make artwork, I want to have I would never say objective, you know, but like a more, I think about things from a timeless point of view. And when I make cartoons for Bloody Elbow, I'm like, all right, let's get in the mud. You know, I'm very fortunate that I have two distinct avenues. And when I make my cartoons, I don't make fine art. It's about a message. It's about I'm part of the commentary editorial community, and I'm fortunate that I can separate those two things, and I can get extra dirty when I cartoon, and I can be extra magnanimous. I can be as respectful of people when I make the book, and the long-standing, the pinnacle of my career, the stuff that I want to do for the rest of my life is the stuff that has respect. I go train. I know I'm a piece of shit. I know I'm weak. I know I'm an old man. I get like whipped by kids half my age. I know what people do out there. But that doesn't mean up here I don't have something to say. I can put it into words. I can put it into imagery a lot better than most people. So I have what I have to offer, is much more. It's on the page. They put it on the cage. What they do in the cage, I put it on the page.
Let's make that a new quote just for you.
Yeah, that's right.
Has there been anything I've missed about the Fine Art of Violence, Volume 2?
I want to say the names of the people who also did the artwork. Edward Cow and Adam Nelson, also known as Gorilla the Bear on Instagram and Twitter. They, I didn't work on this book for 7 months. My back was against the wall. I had to take care of my kids. It was a pandemic. They never left the house. And forget it. Those guys, they saved the day. I hired them. I hired those writers. I paid them, but what they did was amazing. This book is fantastic, and it's because it's greater than the sum of its parts.
Well, it's truly incredible, and I think it takes a special talent and a special person like you, Chris, to bring so many people together. I think so often we look at a book or something like the Fine Art of Violence, Volume 2, and you just want to read by Chris Rini, and you think it's just supposed to showcase you or in a sense of a book, just the author. And so often, no matter if it's fiction, nonfiction, authors aren't just writing. The book isn't just about the author who wrote it. It's about everyone around them. And I give you all the credit in the world for bringing so many people from a sport that isn't the NBA or the NFL or mainstream, quote unquote. It's getting there. And you brought in the heaviest of names, not the most popular, not the ones that everyone's going to see on the marquee, but the ones that those around the sport have the utmost respect for and have some of the best talent in the world. You brought it all together. So the book says by Chris Rini, but the way you brought everyone together, I commend you on that. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece. I love every single part of it. Again, chrisrini.com. And then you could check out MMA Squared on Bloody Elbow. You can follow him on Twitter at Rini MMA. Sir, this has been a great conversation. Hopefully we don't take a year again to talk, but
I was actually thinking, come September, my kids will theoretically be in school again. I hope to start live streaming from my studio, maybe on Twitch or YouTube. And you know what? I hope to do like quarterly reports, like little updates as the making of the book goes along. I think that's going to be fun for people to follow along. I think there's a participatory element to like, oh yeah, that was great. Oh, is he putting it in? Oh yeah, okay, good. I think that I would like the conversation between me and the people who care about this to grow. So that's my goal, is for this to become more of an interactive experience where you get like a little look inside the studio. So that I feel the same.
You have a lifetime invite on this show. I'll always support and promote your work. Thank you so much. The Fine Art of Violence, Volume 2 at chrisrini.com. Sir, thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Take care, man. Thanks for having me on. Great to see you again.